The cold of the hangar seeped through Seth's thin janitorial jacket, a familiar chill that had become a part of his life. But tonight, the cold was sharper, laced with the tension of two grounded pilots and the furious glare of his boss, Mr. Hartman. He shouldn't have been there. His job was to mop floors and empty bins, to remain invisible. Yet here he stood, under the gleaming white wing of a Gulfstream G650, the private jet of Evelyn Reed, CEO of Reed Technologies. A woman he'd only ever seen from a distance, a blur of tailored suits and determined strides. The jet's engines were silent, stubbornly refusing to start, and a multi-million-dollar deal in Zurich hung in the balance. Why, after her own expert mechanics had failed, had she turned to the men who cleaned their break-room toilets? Hartman's voice was a venomous whisper. "You have 5 minutes to explain why you're not holding a mop, Peterson. Ms. Reed's request is insane, and I won't have a janitor touching her aircraft." Seth's gaze remained fixed on the engine cowling. He could feel its stillness, the subtle wrongness of it. His hands, calloused from bleach and brooms, twitched with an old, forgotten muscle memory. He ignored Hartman, his voice quiet but clear, directed only at the woman standing by the cockpit door. "You said the fuel pumps are priming, but the ignition sequence fails." Evelyn Reed stepped forward, her expression unreadable. The pilots exchanged skeptical glances. She simply nodded, her gaze piercing. "That's correct. They've checked everything. The computer shows no errors." Seth took a hesitant step closer, the scent of jet fuel a ghost from another life. A life before the worn-out uniform, before the constant ache of exhaustion, before he was just Rosie's dad, the quiet man from apartment 3B. He was a ghost in this world of power and flight, a world that had once been his. But she had asked for him, and in her eyes, he saw not a CEO looking at a janitor, but a person desperate for a solution, willing to take a chance on a whisper of a memory. The memory was from 3 weeks prior. He had been polishing the glass of the executive lounge that overlooked the tarmac, his movements slow and methodical. Evelyn Reed had been inside, staring out at the same jet, her posture rigid with a grief he recognized. He hadn't meant to speak, but the words slipped out. "It's a beautiful machine. The twin Rolls-Royce engines, they have a unique hum when they're perfectly tuned." A sound like a promise. She had turned, startled, her guard momentarily down. "You know about engines?" He'd simply nodded, embarrassed by his outburst. "I used to." A long time ago. He'd quickly returned to his work, but he felt her watching him. Now, in the present, that single moment was his only credential. He ran a hand over the smooth, cold metal of the engine access panel. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Evelyn gave a sharp nod to her pilot, who reluctantly unlatched the panel. Hartman sputtered, "This is a violation of every protocol. Your job is on the line, Peterson." Ignoring him, Seth leaned in. The complex heart of the machine was laid bare, a tangle of wires, pipes, and precision engineering that made his own heart ache with longing. He didn't need diagnostic tools. He used his senses, honed over a decade of working on these very engines. He sniffed the air. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of unburnt fuel. His fingers, surprisingly nimble, traced a fuel line, feeling for vibrations that weren't there. He found it in less than a minute. A small, secondary fuel filter, tucked away behind a hydraulic reservoir, easily missed in a standard computer diagnostic. It was clogged. A simple, mundane problem, the kind that computers, for all their genius, often overlooked. He pointed. "There. The bypass filter for the ignition injector. It's blocked." The head pilot, a man with 20 years of experience, leaned in, his eyes widening in disbelief. He tapped the housing. "I'll be damned." 5 minutes later, with the filter cleared, the engine roared to life with a perfect, soul-shaking hum. The sound of a promise fulfilled. Evelyn Reed's shoulders, which had been tense enough to snap, finally relaxed. As the ground crew prepared for immediate departure, she approached Seth, pulling a thick envelope from her briefcase. "I don't know how to thank you. Please, take this." Inside was a stack of cash that could have paid his rent for a year. Seth gently pushed her hand away. "No, thank you, Ms. Reed. Just, if you could tell Mr. Hartman it was on your authority, and maybe approve my overtime slip, that's all." Evelyn stared at him, baffled. In her world, everyone had a price. Everyone wanted something more. "That's it. You just saved me a deal worth more than this entire hangar. Seth looked down at his worn boots, a faint smile touching his lips. I didn't do it for the money. I miss the work. He thought of his daughter, Rosie, asleep in their small apartment, her backpack ready by the door for school. He thought of the drawing she'd tucked into his lunchbox that morning, a smiling stick figure labeled Daddy, holding hands with a smaller one labeled Me. That was his currency. I have to get home to my daughter, he said softly. The words hung in the air, simple and profound. Evelyn saw it then, the deep, unshakable integrity in his tired eyes. She saw a man who had lost almost everything but had held onto the one thing that mattered. She pocketed the envelope, a new, more complex plan already forming in her mind. Of course. Thank you, Seth. Using his first name felt like crossing a threshold. The next day was brutal. Hartman, humiliated that a janitor had succeeded where experts failed, was out for blood. He cornered Seth by the slop sink. You think you're some kind of hero, Peterson, he sneered, his face blotchy with rage. You're a janitor. You broke every rule in the book. You're a liability. He slapped a formal disciplinary warning onto the wet counter. This is your first and final warning. One more toe out of line, one more fantasy about being a mechanic, and you're gone. You'll be lucky to find a job cleaning gutters. The threat landed like a punch to the gut. This job, as demeaning as it often was the fragile thread holding his life together. It was Rosie's school lunches, the roof over her head, the second-hand coat that kept her warm. Fear, cold and metallic, filled his throat. He spent the rest of the day in a haze of anxiety, scrubbing floors with a frantic energy, trying to make himself smaller, more invisible than ever. That evening, he tried to hide his worry from Rosie as they ate dinner, macaroni and cheese from a box. But she saw it. His 7-year-old daughter, with her wide, knowing eyes, saw everything. Are you sad, Daddy? She asked, pushing a piece of macaroni onto her fork. He forced a smile. Just tired, sweet pea. Long day. She slid off her chair, came around the small table, and wrapped her arms around his neck. It's okay, she whispered into his ear, her small voice a balm on his frayed nerves. You're the best daddy in the whole world. He held her tight, the warmth of her small body a shield against the cold fear. He was terrified of failing her. The warning slip felt like a ticking bomb in his locker, a countdown to losing it all. Evelyn returned 2 days later, the Zurich deal successfully closed. The first thing she did was not meet with her board, but seek out the hangar's lead mechanic. From him, she learned about Hartman's vindictive write-up and the threat against Seth's job. A quiet fury built within her. She found Seth in the deserted employee break room, staring into a cup of lukewarm coffee, the weight of the world on his slumped shoulders. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on his face, highlighting the exhaustion etched around his eyes. She approached quietly, her heels clicking softly on the linoleum. I heard what Hartman did, she said, her voice gentle. I am so sorry. I never intended for my request to put you in this position. Seth looked up, surprised. He expected anger, or at the very least, corporate distance. He didn't expect an apology. It's not your fault, Ms. Reed. It is, she insisted, sitting in the worn plastic chair opposite him. I used your skill without considering the consequences for you. That was selfish. The formal barrier between them seemed to dissolve in the sterile room. She spoke of the pressure she was under, the legacy of her father, a pilot himself who had loved the jet, and the board members who saw her as too young, too female, too soft. In turn, Seth found himself opening up, telling her about his life as a certified aviation engineer, the wife he had lost to a sudden illness, and the cascade of grief and financial ruin that followed, forcing him into this life just to stay afloat and care for Rosie. He wasn't just a janitor, he was a man hollowed out by loss, rebuilding his world one mopped floor at a time. She listened, her gaze never wavering, and for the first time in years, Seth felt seen. Not pitted, but truly seen. Hartman, meanwhile, felt his power solidify. He believed Evelyn Reed's silence was tacit approval of his authority. He decided to make a public spectacle of firing Seth, a definitive statement to anyone else who might step out of their designated role. He called a mandatory all-hands meeting in the main hangar bay, right in front of the gleaming Gulf Stream. The entire staff, mechanics, ground crew, administrative assistants, and other janitors, was assembled. Seth was called to the front, his heart pounding against his ribs. He stood there, in his faded blue uniform, feeling the weight of dozens of pitying or scornful eyes. As you all know, this company prioritizes safety and protocol above all else, Hartman began, his voice booming with self-importance. We cannot have untrained personnel performing unauthorized work on multi-million-dollar aircraft. It is a gross violation, a danger to our clients and our reputation. He held up the disciplinary form. Seth Peterson, despite his role as a member of the custodial staff, took it upon himself to tamper with Ms. Reed's aircraft. This reckless act, regardless of the outcome, is grounds for immediate termination. He paused for dramatic effect, a cruel smirk on his face. Therefore, effective immediately, Mr. Peterson's employment is about to be the least of your concerns. Mr. Hartman, the voice, sharp and cold as ice, cut through the hangar. All heads turned. Evelyn Reed stood at the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed, her expression flinty. She walked slowly toward the front, her presence silencing the entire room. The air crackled with a new, dangerous energy. Hartman's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion and alarm. Seth's breath caught in his throat. He had expected to be fired and shamed, but he had not expected a savior. Evelyn stopped directly in front of Hartman, her eyes locking onto his. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said, her voice dangerously low and carrying to every corner of the hangar. "Mr. Peterson was not tampering with my aircraft. He was acting on my direct and explicit order." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Hartman paled. But the protocols, the liability," he stammered. "The liability," Evelyn cut him off, "was a grounded jet and a 9-figure deal on the verge of collapse because your so-called experts were stumped. Mr. Peterson, with his untrained eyes, solved the problem in under 5 minutes." She took another step closer, and Hartman instinctively recoiled. "It's funny you bring up protocols, Mr. Hartman. Because I had my team pull your management reports. I found a dozen formal complaints of bullying filed against you over the past 2 years. I found evidence of you falsifying overtime sheets to shortchange employees. And I found that you, personally, signed off on the maintenance inspection that missed the clogged filter on my father's jet 3 weeks ago." The blood drained from Hartman's face. He was exposed, his petty tyranny laid bare for all to see. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The man who had wielded his minimal power like a weapon was now utterly powerless. Evelyn's voice was devoid of all emotion. "You're the liability, Mr. Hartman. You cultivate a culture of fear, not excellence. You judge people by their uniforms, not their abilities. And you are a danger to my company and its values." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The quiet finality of her words was devastating. Seth stood frozen, watching the men who had tormented him completely unravel. It wasn't just a defense, it was a demolition. "Security will escort you off the premises. Your termination is effective immediately," Evelyn stated, turning her back on the shell-shocked Hartman as 2 guards moved forward. The crowd was silent, stunned. Evelyn then turned to face Seth. The entire hangar staff watched as the powerful CEO stood before the humble janitor. The anger in her eyes softened, replaced by a profound respect. "Seth," she said, her voice now warm and clear. "I believe a position has just opened up." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the mechanics. "But I have something different in mind for you. I'm creating a new role. Head of Engineering and Restoration for my personal fleet, starting with the complete overhaul and modernization of this G650. It was my father's, and I want it treated by someone who understands not just its mechanics, but its soul." She named a salary that made Seth's head spin, a figure that was more than he had made in his best year as an engineer. It was not just a job, it was a lifeline. It was a restoration of his dignity, his passion, and his future. Seth was speechless. His mind, which seconds ago had been bracing for homelessness, couldn't process the sudden reversal. His hand went instinctively to his breast pocket, feeling the crinkle of the crayon drawing Rosie had made for him. A smiling stick-figure dad. He looked at Evelyn, at the sea of faces now looking at him with newfound respect, and finally, he found his voice. A single, choked word. "Yes." A wave of spontaneous applause broke out among the crew, a genuine celebration of the underdog's victory. Seth felt tears welling in his eyes for the first time in years, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming, unbelievable gratitude. 6 months later, the hangar was transformed. Seth, now in a crisp, dark blue engineering polo with Reed Fleet Management embroidered over the pocket, moved with a confidence he thought he had lost forever. He was no longer a ghost, he was a leader. His team of mechanics respected him not just for his title, but for his deep knowledge and his quiet, steady hand. The Gulfstream, his first project, gleamed under the lights, its engines purring with a perfection he had personally overseen. It was more than a machine to him now, it was a symbol of his own restoration. Evelyn visited the hangar often, but her visits were different. She no longer came as a CEO inspecting an asset. She came as a friend, bringing coffee, asking about his day. The formal barrier was gone completely, replaced by an easy camaraderie. One sunny Saturday afternoon, she arrived to find not just Seth, but a small girl with bright, curious eyes and a missing front tooth, who was carefully drawing airplanes in a notebook at a workbench. "You must be Rosie," Evelyn said, her smile genuine and warm. Rosie looked up, unafraid. She had heard all about the nice lady who gave her daddy his old job back. She scrambled off the stool, ran over, and wrapped her arms around Evelyn's legs in an unprompted, heartfelt hug. Then, she held up her notebook. On the page was a new drawing, a big airplane, with 3 smiling stick figures beside it. She pointed to them one by one. "Daddy, you, and me." Evelyn felt a surprising warmth spread through her chest, a feeling that had nothing to do with corporate success or closing a deal. She knelt down, looking at the drawing. "It's the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Later that evening, after Rosie had been picked up by a neighbor for a sleepover, Seth and Evelyn stood on the quiet tarmac, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was cool, filled with the scent of distant rain and the faint, comforting smell of jet fuel. "Thank you," Seth said, breaking the comfortable silence. He looked at her, his expression full of a gratitude that words couldn't capture. "Not just for the job. For seeing me. When I felt like I was invisible." Evelyn leaned against the railing, her gaze on the horizon. "You were never invisible, Seth. You were just quiet. You reminded me of my father. He always said you can judge a person's character by how they treat things they don't have to, a piece of machinery, a stranger, a promise." She turned to him, a soft smile on her lips. "You fixed more than just my jet that night. You reminded me what this was all about. It's not about the deals or the bottom line. It's about passion. Integrity." The vast, empty space that grief had carved into both their lives felt smaller in that moment. It was being filled, slowly but surely, by the framework of a new, unexpected family. A family built not on blood or obligation, but on shared respect, quiet strength, and the courage to take a chance on a person everyone else had overlooked. And one has to wonder, how many lives could be changed if we all learned to look past the uniform and see the person wearing it? How many hidden geniuses are sweeping floors, waiting for someone to see the spark of passion in their eyes? Sometimes, the people with the power to fix the most broken things are not the ones in charge, but the ones with the quietest hands and the biggest hearts. The shriek of the fire alarm was a physical assault, a high-pitched scream that vibrated through the steel and glass of the Sterling Tower penthouse. But inside the vault, the sound was a dull, muffled thrum, a sinister heartbeat counting down the seconds Isabel Sterling had left. Smoke, thick and acrid, coiled like a serpent under the impossibly tight seal of the door, stealing the air from her lungs. She pounded a fist against the cold, unyielding metal, the impact jarring her wrist. It was useless. The electronic keypad on the outside was fried, the biometric scanner a dead, glassy eye. Her own fortress, her father's monument to security and paranoia, had become her tomb. Outside, she could hear the chaos, shouted orders, the frantic crackle of radios. And one voice, colder than the steel surrounding her, cut through the panic. "The asset protocols are clear. We prioritize the servers on the 45th floor." Ms. Sterling understood the risks of installing a pre-digital relic. Donovan Croft, her COO. He was talking about her as if she were already a line item in a quarterly loss report. The thought sent a spike of pure, cold rage through her, momentarily eclipsing the fear. She was not an asset. She was a daughter, a leader, a woman gasping for breath in a box of her own making. Then, through the cacophony, a different call. A desperate, last-ditch idea from a junior security guard. "Get a locksmith. An old-school 1-inch. Samuel Finch smelled of motor oil, rain-soaked pavement, and the cheap, strong coffee that fueled his life. He pushed through the throng of firefighters and panicked executives, his worn denim jacket and scuffed work boots a stark anomaly in the slick, corporate opulence of the penthouse lobby. In his hand, he clutched a battered leather tool roll that had belonged to his grandfather. Donovan Croft, his face a mask of patrician contempt, took one look at Sam and sneered. "This is who you brought? We need a thermal lance, a demolition team, not a handyman." Sam ignored him. His eyes were fixed on the architectural plans unfurled on a makeshift table. His finger traced the outline of the vault. "It's a Matthias Citadel. Model 7. Pre-war." His voice was quiet, a low rumble that commanded attention despite its volume. The fire chief, a man with soot on his face and exhaustion in his eyes, looked at him. "Can you open it?" Sam's gaze was steady. "My grandfather taught me about these. They're not just locks. They're puzzles." He unzipped a small pocket on his jacket and pulled out his wallet, checking the small, folded piece of paper tucked inside. It was a drawing from his 7-year-old daughter, Rosie. A brightly colored bird with wings outstretched, a clumsy heart drawn above it. His good luck charm. His reason. He tucked it safely back and turned to the fire chief. "I need quiet. Absolute quiet. And I need to talk to her." Donovan scoffed. "Talk to her? It's a bank vault, not a therapy session." Sam finally met the COO's gaze, his own eyes as hard and unyielding as the steel he was about to face. "She's running out of air. Fear burns oxygen faster than fire. Now get everyone back." Inside, Isabel's world had shrunk to the stifling confines of the vault. The emergency light flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the shelves of priceless artifacts and leather-bound ledgers that chronicled her family's empire. Her legacy. Each item was a weight, a monument to a past she had fought to uphold. Now, they felt like tombstones. She coughed, a ragged, painful rasp that tore at her throat. The smoke was thicker now, a gray shroud blurring the edges of her vision. She slumped against the wall, her cheek pressed to the cool metal, a small comfort in the rising heat. Her father had installed this vault. "It will withstand anything, Isabel," he had boasted, his voice full of pride. "A symbol of our permanence." The irony was a bitter pill. She was dying inside his symbol of permanence. Muffled shouts still bled through the door, a chaotic symphony of futility. But then, a new sound. A tapping. Followed by a voice, calm and low, right against the door. "Miss Sterling. My name is Sam. I'm a locksmith. Can you hear me?" It was the steadiest thing she had heard all night. It cut through the fog of her panic like a lighthouse beam. She pushed herself upright, crawling toward the sound, pressing her ear against the door. The steel was warm now. "Yes," she croaked, her voice a stranger's. "I can hear you." The voice on the other side was a bomb. "Good. Just keep listening to me. We're going to get you out." Sam knelt before the massive circular door, a stethoscope pressed against the cold steel dial. He had cleared the area, his quiet authority overriding Donovan's sputtering protests. "It's a Matthias Citadel," he explained to the attentive fire chief. "They were built in Germany before the Second World War. The engineers were paranoid. They knew bombing raids could shift a building's foundation, misaligning the tumblers and locking the mechanism permanently." He pulled a set of gleaming tuning forks from his leather roll. "So they built in a back door. An acoustic override. It's not in any manual. They called it the Geisterschlüssel, the ghost key. It responds to a specific sequence of resonant frequencies that vibrate the internal counterweights, bypassing the primary tumblers entirely." Donovan, lingering at the edge of the cordon, let out a derisive laugh. "Frequencies? Are you going to sing it open? This is insane. He's wasting precious time with fairy tales." Sam didn't even look up. He closed his eyes, his mind's eye picturing the intricate schematics from his grandfather's journals, pages filled with spidery ink and brilliant, obsessive detail. He saw the hidden pins, the counterweighted levers, the secret heart of the machine. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was physics. It was history. And it was Isabel Sterling's only hope. He chose the first tuning fork, its metal humming with a low C-sharp. He held it near the stethoscope's diaphragm, listening intently to the echo from within the steel. "Miss Sterling. Isabel. I need you to stay with me." Sam's voice was a steady anchor in the swirling smoke and fear. "I need you to tell me what you see. Is there a maker's plate on the inside of the door? Isabel's mind struggled to focus. She blinked, her eyes stinging. She dragged her body closer to the interior handle mechanism, her fingers tracing the metalwork. Yes, she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. There's a small, brass plate. An engraving. A bird, an eagle, I think. With a key in its talons, a faint, triumphant sound came from the other side, a soft exhalation. The eagle of Matthias. Okay. That's good. That's very good. His voice was so close, so real. It felt less like he was on the other side of a foot of steel and more like he was right there with her, a solid presence in the dark. Are you scared? She asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. A moment of silence. Then, always. But my daughter, Rosie, she expects me home for breakfast. She doesn't like it when I'm late. The simple, domestic detail was so profoundly human it made Isabel's throat tighten. Here she was, a titan of industry, trapped with millions in assets, and her rescuer was a man motivated by pancakes and a child's expectations. In that moment, the gulf between their worlds vanished, replaced by a fragile, desperate connection forged through a wall of fire-heated steel. He was no longer just a locksmith. He was Sam. And he was trying to get home to his daughter. The heat intensified, the metal of the vault door growing uncomfortably warm against Sam's hands. A firefighter touched his shoulder. Chief says you have 5 minutes, maybe less. The ceiling is starting to buckle. We have to pull you out. The words were a death sentence. Suddenly, Donovan Croft was there, shoving past the firefighter, his face slick with sweat and fury. That's it. It's over. The structure is compromised. We are evacuating this floor now. He grabbed Sam's arm, trying to haul him to his feet. Leave it. The insurance will cover the vault. We're losing the whole building. Sam's reaction was instantaneous and visceral. He ripped his arm free and shoved Donovan back, a surge of protective rage coursing through him. A person is not an asset you can write off, he snarled, his voice a low growl that silenced the room. The firefighters flanking him stood their ground, forming a silent wall between Sam and the furious COO. The chief stepped forward, his eyes locking with Sam's. He's right, the chief said, his voice firm. He nodded at Sam. You get 3 minutes. Then we all go, with or without her. It was a grim ultimatum, but it was more than nothing. Sam turned back to the vault, his focus absolute. 3 minutes. He had to unravel a 70-year-old puzzle in 180 seconds. He picked up the next tuning fork. Isabel, I'm going to make some noise now. Don't be alarmed, Sam said, his voice urgent but still calm. He held a small, felt-tipped mallet in one hand and a specific tuning fork in the other. He struck it lightly. A pure, resonant note sang in the tense air. He pressed the vibrating fork against the dial, listening through the stethoscope, his head tilted. Ping. Nothing. He chose another fork. Struck it. Pressed it to the dial. Ping. A faint, almost imperceptible click echoed back from the vault's metallic guts. He felt it more than he heard it, a tiny seismic shift in the mechanism. He worked faster now, a strange, frantic musician playing a symphony for an audience of one. Ping. Clink. Ping. Thump. Each note was a question, each response from the lock a clue. Inside, the sounds were otherworldly. Faint, ethereal chimes that seemed to come from the very air around her. Isabel, slumped near the door, thought she was hallucinating, hearing the music of angels coming to take her. Then she heard it. A sound that was not music. A deep, mechanical, and profoundly final thunk. It vibrated through the floor, up her spine. The sound of release. Outside, Sam threw his entire body weight against the massive, 5-spoked wheel handle. It resisted, groaning like a prehistoric beast stirring from a long slumber. He grunted, muscles straining, sweat pouring down his face. Then, with a final, shuddering screech of metal on metal, it gave. The door swung inward, releasing a billow of black smoke and revealing the silhouette of a woman, collapsing on the floor of her gilded prison. Sam didn't hesitate. He plunged into the smoke-filled chamber, his arms finding Isabel, scooping her up as if she weighed nothing. She was frighteningly light. He carried her out into the organized chaos of the penthouse, past the stunned, slack-jawed face of Donovan Croft, and into the waiting arms of the paramedics. They laid her on a stretcher, an oxygen mask quickly covering her soot-stained face. As they prepared to move her, her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. Her grip was weak but insistent. Her eyes, wide and startlingly blue against the grime, locked onto his. "Thank you," she whispered, the words muffled by the mask. Her gaze held a universe of terror, relief, and a dawning, profound gratitude. Sam could only nod, his own throat tight with a mixture of adrenaline and exhaustion. He watched them wheel her away, the urgency of the moment sweeping her out of his life as quickly as she had entered it. He felt a strange sense of displacement, an intruder in a world he didn't belong to. He looked down and saw his wallet lying on the floor, knocked loose in the final effort to open the door. He picked it up, his thumb brushing over the worn leather. He opened it and looked at Rosie's drawing of the bird. Its wings were still outstretched, ready for flight. All he could think about was picking her up from the neighbors, the familiar comfort of her small hand in his, and the simple, grounding task of making her toast for a late-night supper. A week later, the bell above the door of Finch & Son, Locks and Keys, chimed. The shop was a small, cluttered haven of history, smelling of brass polish and old paper. Sam looked up from the intricate workings of a 19th-century chest lock and froze. Isabel Sterling stood there, looking completely out of place in his humble world. She wore a simple gray coat, her hair was pulled back, and the only sign of her status was the quiet confidence with which she held herself. The soot was gone, but a shadow of the ordeal remained in her eyes. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice clear and strong. She stepped forward and placed a small, elegant envelope on his workbench. "This is for you. For your services. And your courage." He opened it. Inside was a check with enough zeros to make his head spin. It was more money than his father and grandfather had earned in their lifetimes combined. He stared at it for a long moment, then gently pushed the envelope back toward her. "My emergency call-out fee is $300, he said quietly. "Anything more feels wrong. My grandfather taught me how to do this to help people. The skill is the reward." Isabel looked at him, a slow, unreadable expression dawning on her face. "Donovan Croft has been dismissed," she said. "He saw a liability." "You saw a life." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the old tools, the blueprints on the wall. "I'm restructuring my company's archival division. I need someone to protect our history, not just our data. Someone who understands that some things of value can't be digitized. The position is head of legacy security. It's yours, if you want it," she then added, her voice softer, "and I'd also like to buy you dinner. This time, without a 1-ton steel door between us." Months melted into a comfortable new rhythm. Sam's life was no longer a frantic juggle of late-night calls and worrying about the rent. The position at Sterling Corp gave him stability, but more importantly, it gave him purpose, allowing him to use his unique knowledge to preserve history on a grand scale. He still kept his father's shop, opening it on Saturdays, a place to ground himself. This Saturday, Isabel was with him. The scent of brass polish mingled with the faint, expensive perfume she wore. Rosie sat at a small table Sam had built for her, happily drawing, a collection of old, interesting keys spread out before her like treasures. Sam had his grandfather's journals open on the workbench, the delicate pages filled with elegant script and detailed drawings. He was showing Isabel the original entry on the Matthias Citadel. Her fingers, long and graceful, traced the drawing of the eagle with the key in its talons. "He was a genius," she said, her voice full of awe. "He was a good man," Sam replied, his hand coming to rest over hers on the open page. The contact was simple, warm, and felt more real than any corporate contract. He believed that the best things are built to last, but the most important things are the ones that can be opened. He looked from her eyes to his daughter, who was concentrating fiercely on her art. That's what mattered to him. Kindness. And coming home, Rosie, as if on cue, held up her latest masterpiece. It was a drawing of a man, a woman, and a little girl, their hands linked. They were standing next to a giant, open vault door, and high above them, a brightly colored bird soared into a clear blue sky. A new family, a shared future, the door to everything finally unlocked. The old man sat at the far end of the bar, a ghost in a tailored suit, nursing a single glass of whiskey for 3 hours. Ethan knew the type. Lonely, wealthy, and invisible by choice. He treated him the same as he treated everyone at the Alibi, the worn-down but warm neighborhood tavern he tended 4 nights a week. He offered a quiet nod, kept the water glass full, and polished the scarred mahogany in front of him, a rhythmic, grounding motion that kept the world at bay. Ethan was a single dad, a man running on fumes and the fierce, quiet love for his 7-year-old daughter, Sophie. Most patrons saw the exhaustion clinging to him like a second skin, the faint shadows under his eyes. They saw a man treading water, and their tips were often tinged with a gentle pity he never acknowledged. But this man, with eyes that seemed to see right through the tired bartender to the foundation of the men beneath, he was different. When he finally rose to leave, he placed a hand on a thick, plain white envelope on the bar. "For you," he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum. For the quiet work, before Ethan could protest or even process the words, the man was gone, melting into the city night. Ethan picked up the envelope. It was heavy. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone. Tucking it under the bar, he waited until the last drunk had been sent home and the chairs were stacked on the tables. Under the dim glow of a single bare bulb, he opened it. His breath caught. Stacks of crisp $100 bills. He counted them twice, his hands shaking. $5,000. It was more money than he'd seen in one place in his entire life. It was new shoes for Sophie. It was the overdue rent paid. It was a month without the gnawing fear in his gut. It was a miracle. But as he stared at the money, a question echoed the old man's words: what was the quiet work? Ethan tucked the envelope into the inner pocket of his worn leather jacket, the weight of it both a comfort and a burden. At home, in their small 2-bedroom apartment that always smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books, Sophie was asleep, her small face serene in the moonlight filtering through the window. He crept into her room and watched her breathe, the soft rise and fall of her chest the only anchor he needed. On her bedside table was a drawing she'd made for him, a stick figure with a huge smile labeled Daddy standing next to a smaller one labeled Sophie. They were holding hands under a giant, smiling sun. He felt a familiar ache in his chest, the phantom limb of grief for his late wife, Sarah, who should have been the third figure in that drawing. This money, it was a chance to build a tiny fortress around what was left of his world. The next day, he put the envelope in a shoebox at the back of his closet, behind a stack of Sarah's old paperbacks. He couldn't bring himself to spend it, not yet. It felt like a test, though he didn't know who the judge was. At work that evening, the bar's owner, Clara, was in her small office, her face illuminated by the cold light of a laptop screen. Clara was sharp, driven, and carried a sadness of her own that she wore like expensive armor. She'd inherited the Alibi from her father a year ago and was fighting to keep it afloat against a tide of debt and her brother's relentless pressure to sell. She saw Ethan as a reliable employee, but also, he suspected, as a symbol of